I think you can very conservatively. I mean, I was calling for 100. You could see, I like the way it's progressing. It kind of moves up and then it builds a nice big base and flag, and then it moves up again and builds, so we're at 58, and then we went to 70, and then we went to 100. And I think the next move is going to take us to 130 or something. And where's the top on the cycle? I don't know. Looking at last cycles, I mean, I would guess, I think 200 is just kind of easy. It feels to me like we will get there, no question. And obviously at any point in time, different political events could shove it much higher. I mean, I think if the big print comes along, which is, we'll talk about that later, but if the government has to capitulate and start printing money again, it'll go a lot higher than 200 on this cycle. And that's a possibility, but there are never any certainties in this world. But I feel very good, buying it right here. I think it will be higher. I also think that when we get to the next peak.
Lawrence Lepard explores the current state of the world economy today, highlighting the increasing volatility of fiat money. He describes the ways that ongoing money printing and growing debt are eroding trust in established financial institutions. Lepard cites past instances of currency devaluation to support his claim that the strongest defenses against this economic volatility are tangible assets like gold and Bitcoin. He predicts that the growing demand for safe haven assets would propel gold and Bitcoin to tremendous upside. Lepard maintains his optimism about these markets' long-term worth despite acknowledging their volatility. Remember to click the subscribe button and enable notifications to ensure that you never miss our most recent analysis. Thank you and enjoy the video.
I think you can very conservatively. I mean, I was calling for 100. You could see, I like the way it's progressing. It kind of moves up and then it builds a nice big base and flag, and then it moves up again and builds, so we're at 58, and then we went to 70, and then we went to 100. And I think the next move is going to take us to 130 or something. And where's the top on the cycle? I don't know. Looking at last cycles, I mean, I would guess, I think 200 is just kind of easy. It feels to me like we will get there, no question. Does it go a lot beyond that? It could. I mean, at how many standard deviations above, the 200-day moving average can it go, right? I mean, and obviously at any point in time, different political events could shove it much higher. I mean, I think if the big print comes along, which is, we'll talk about that later, but if the government has to capitulate and start printing money again, it'll go a lot higher than 200 on this cycle. And that's a possibility, but there are never any certainties in this world. But I feel very good, buying it right here. I think it will be higher. I also think that when we get to the next peak, there'll probably be a correction. I don't think we're going to see any more of the 80 or 90% corrections, but a 30, 40, 50% correction would certainly be something I could see. So, I mean, my model is maybe it goes to 250 and then corrects back to 150 or something. I think we're kind of already in it, and actually lower rates would somewhat help. I mean, the lower rates, the greater problem there is that it will reignite inflation. I mean, I don't think they really have inflation tamed. My most recent quarterly letter just talks about that. There's a lot of evidence they don't. Labor is getting more than 2% a year. The longshoremen just got 10% for a year for 6 years. Agriculture commodities last year as a basket were up 20 some odd percent, which is why, your food bills are higher. And to me, it's coming, but I don't know when. And that is the hard part. But for those of us who are in Bitcoin and who have kind of a hodl philosophy and have had it for years and years, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, if we, I'm quite convinced these coins are going to $1 million and then someday $10 million, very much like Saylor says. And whether it happens in 3 years or 6 years, it's the same place, and we have long time preference. We can wait. So 2 trillion on 900, that means 0.2% of the world's assets are in Bitcoin right now. 0.2%. Okay, so Bitcoin could go up 10x. Bitcoin could go from 0.2% to 2% of the world's assets. And it would still, represent a small fraction. I mean, the amount of gold in the world, there's $18 trillion worth of gold in the world. So Bitcoin's got to go up 9x to beat gold. And, to me, it's just obvious that it's going to happen unless something in the trends that I'm looking at changes. And that's always possible. I mean, you never say never in the investment business because, you can believe something and be totally wrong. But, it doesn't, I mean, I don't see anything to indicate that that's likely to happen. So, and I think 2% is just a starting point. I mean, if this really is a sounder form of money than anything else out there, it will become, the go-to long-term saving asset that just kind of compounds over time. And, it's 100,000, I missed it. I know you bought it a lot cheaper. Gosh, good for you, but that's not so good for me. And I'm kind of like, well, if I told you, I had a story about this in the book about in Microsoft. I bought it, it went up 3 or 4x, and I needed some money, so I sold it. But it continued to go up another 1,000x. Do you know what I mean? And so, if in 5 years Bitcoin's $1 million, and I think that's very doable, and in 15 years Bitcoin's $10 million, and I think that's very doable. Are you going to care that you paid 90 or 110 for it? I mean, I don't think so. And that's the way you got to look at it. I mean, I get a kick out of, talk to Max Kaiser, and he says, yeah, I felt like I was overpaying because Trace was getting it at 25 cents and I had to pay $1. Do you know what I mean? I mean, everybody feels like they're overpaying, and that's just the nature. You got to understand what it is. There's a fixed supply of it, so it's always going to feel expensive, because as he says, it's going up forever, Laura. And so you just buy it and sit back. And I mean, the toughest part, and I talk about this in the book too, is to people who don't really fundamentally understand what it is. And I had some people I put into it, kind of at the tops before the SBF episode at 50 or 60, and they were buying it. And it went down to 15 because of SBF and, rate hikes and all the other stuff. And they said, oh shit, I made a mistake. And they blew it out, right? They sold it. And that's the toughest part. I think it's incumbent upon all of us Bitcoiners to help the people that we're bringing along with us to understand that you've got to view this as if it goes down 50%, I don't care, because I have a 5, 10, 15, 20-year window here. And I know, everyone who's held it for 4 years is in the black. And I think that pattern will continue.
According to Lawrence Lepard, Bitcoin is comparable to early investment opportunities such as Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. He notes that many investors lost out on enormous gains because they sold too soon. He stresses the value of patience and the potential of holding Bitcoin for at least 10 years in order to prevent this error. Lepard asserts that this long-term strategy may result in wealth that changes people's lives. Even holding a single Bitcoin, he says, might transform the game for years to come. Lepard tells an emotional story of a truck driver who expressed gratitude for his Bitcoin advice, describing how even a modest investment significantly improved his financial circumstances. This stunning illustration highlights how Bitcoin has the ability to change people's lives. We're about to dive deep into his insights, but before we do, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos.
And so, as we get more and more people using Bitcoin or using any network, the networks gets bigger and more powerful in a geometric kind of fashion. So that's why, when we sit here and we look at, and, you hear sailors say $13 million Bitcoin, or I'm saying $10 million Bitcoin, and people just look at me like I'm nuts, like you're out of your mind. That's never going to happen. And I'm absolutely sure it's going to happen. I'm completely convinced of it. But people think I'm crazy. And it's just because of the model that I'm using, and I'm comparing it to these other network businesses and what they did in terms of value growth, right? And there's this chapter in this book that compares Bitcoin to all the other, Bitcoin is just crushing every other alternative investment. So if you're in the investment management business and you're not aware of Bitcoin, considering Bitcoin, saying, hey, maybe you should have a little allocation to it. Look, I understand why people are concerned and afraid about it. In fact, there's a chapter in the book called Skepticism that talks about all the FUD that people have thrown up, and I've tried to swat those things away. Yeah, TradFi, I think, it's, they're going to be forced. When you're performing so much better just by having a little bit of Bitcoin in your portfolio than the person who just owns the S&P and doesn't have the Bitcoin, that's their job. Their job is to get good performance for their clients. And so, at some point they're going to slowly but surely all be forced to wake up and recognize that they're not doing their job if they don't allocate something into this asset. Again, the book is trying to push that, that narrative and help them to understand it. And I try and do it, in a reasonably kind way. The only part of the book that's kind of unkind is I'm pretty harsh on the central bankers, because they've, in my view, they really are they're at the scene of the crime, and they're the arrogance of the central bankers is part of how we got into this mess. But I think, what will probably happen is, some more nation states will announce that they're stacking it. The U.S. just, as you saw, Trump just signed an executive order talking about creating a digital reserve. I wish he'd called it a Bitcoin reserve, but he had to give a nod to all the other coins that have supported him in his election. I think, it will get onto bank balance sheets. It's just, I think once you start to realize what it is, you kind of FOMO into it because you just don't want to miss it. I remember listening to Saylor talking about how when he first found it, he was like, oh my God, I got to buy as much of this thing as I can before it gets away from me. And of course, he still keeps buying it, even though it's higher. And I think, when people have that quote unquote aha moment, and more of them have it, Samson's not wrong. I mean, we will be $1 million a coin. It's and that's why, that's why I'm not going to sell any, and that's why don't cap your upside. You just don't know what's going to happen. So but you've got to always be mentally prepared for the drawdown. We could be at 200 in a year, which seems very likely to me. At the end of this year, we'd be at 200, and we could all be feeling great and think we're geniuses, and look at the numbers and say, gosh, I'm a lot richer than I used to be. And something could happen, and we could have a 50% drawdown easily. And, that would be a great buying opportunity in my view. But, you'd have to have some cash to buy it with coming from some other source. But, I certainly wouldn't sell it there. I mean, I view this as something I'm going to hold for decades. And, perhaps someday when I retire and I need, it doesn't produce a yield, and I don't really believe in most of the yield producing products, and I'm not sure I really even want to borrow against it. I imagine what I would do is just say, okay, I'll sell 1% of what I hold or whatever I need to cover my annual expenses. And, at the age I'm at, it's unlikely I'll run out of money before, time catches up with me. So, it is what it is. It's an unbelievable opportunity. I mean, the book talks about this too. There's, all the money and the great wealth in this world has been built in asymmetric situations that don't have a capped upside. All you can lose is what you put in. And this is the most asymmetric situation I've seen in 40 some odd years of investing. I mean, I saw some other ones, I blew it. Google was one, and Amazon was one, and so forth. But this is just as good, in my opinion, perhaps better. And that asymmetry, it just creates wealth like nothing else.
Although many people believe that Lawrence Lepard is crazy for predicting that Bitcoin will reach $10 million per coin, he fervently maintains his forecast. He says that the reason he is so convinced is because Bitcoin's value has increased exponentially in comparison to other network-based businesses like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Bitcoin is outperforming all other investment options, according to Lepard, and he thinks that established financial institutions will soon have no choice but to embrace it if they remain competitive. In response to the doubts about Bitcoin, Lepard points out that it's normal to be anxious and apprehensive while working with something so innovative. He advises individuals, though, to spend some time learning about the full potential of Bitcoin. He underlines that Bitcoin is one of the most asymmetric investment opportunities he has encountered in over 40 years of investing, with an almost infinite upside and a loss that is restricted to the amount invested. In the future, he notes, possessing even one Bitcoin might change one's life, making those who saw its potential early on stand out. Lepard demonstrates the practical effects of Bitcoin, even for individuals making small investments, with human narratives such as a heartwarming account of a truck driver who thanked him for his insights. Comparing the revolutionary influence of Bitcoin to that of early aviation or the internet, technologies that were originally questioned but ultimately changed the world, he ends by pushing naysayers to alter their minds. He is still certain that, like the early internet limits were eventually overcome, Bitcoin's current problems, such scalability and transaction speed, will be fixed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for more valuable content, and as always, happy investing.